Imagine getting a massive fine for parking on your own family's land, only to find the HOA president trying to tow your truck, right before you reveal she built her entire $1 million gated community on your private property. Hit that subscribe button right now, because this is the ultimate story of malicious compliance, and watching entitled bullies get completely destroyed has never been this satisfying. Imagine walking out to your own driveway, a place your family has owned for generations, only to find an official, gold-embossed neon sticker plastered across your windshield demanding a massive fine. Not from the city, not from the state, but from a brand new, self-righteous Homeowners Association that didn't even exist when your grandfather built the house. I didn't lose my temper. I didn't scream at the HOA president when she marched up my driveway to gloat. I just smiled, took the ticket, and decided to hand them a bill that would bankrupt their entire committee. Welcome to the world of HOA madness, where common sense goes to die, and petty tyrants rule with clipboards. To understand how a quiet rural property owner ended up waging a silent, multi-thousand-dollar financial war against a suburban empire, you have to look at what happened to the land surrounding my family's farm. For decades, our borders were defined by thick woods, quiet pastures, and absolute peace. But 2 years ago, a massive development company bought out the old dairy farm next door and erected 50 cookie-cutter luxury mansions. They called it Pinecrest Estates. With those mansions came a very specific type of resident, people who traded city life for the suburbs and immediately brought their deep-seated need for control right along with them. They planted manicured lawns that required industrial amounts of water. They installed uniform mailboxes. And most importantly, they created an HOA. At the head of that HOA was a woman named Eleanor. Eleanor was a nightmare wrapped in a designer sweater. She operated with the unyielding cruelty and brute strength of a grizzly bear, completely flattening anyone who dared to question her absolute authority. She patrolled the neighborhood with a clipboard, hunting down violations like a hawk looking for field mice. She fined people for leaving those air trash cans out 20 minutes past the deadline. She threatened contractors if their trucks dripped a single drop of oil on the pristine public asphalt. The only problem? My farm wasn't part of Pinecrest Estates. My property line was established back in 1910. I never signed their CCRs. I never paid a dime of their dues. My driveway was entirely on my own land, clearly separated from their subdivision by a historical stone wall. Yet Eleanor looked at my property like a king looks at an unconquered province. She hated my old pickup truck. She hated the vintage tractor I kept parked near the barn. But most of all, she hated that my driveway was visible from the back windows of their precious luxury homes. It started with polite, condescending notes left in my mailbox. Then came the formal warning letters. And finally, the financial penalties began piling up. Fees for unsightly commercial storage, fees for unauthorized vehicle parking, and fees for failing to maintain subdivision aesthetic standards. They were billing me for parking my own truck on my own land. Most people would have thrown the letters in the trash. I did too, for the first 3 notices. But Eleanor wasn't someone who gave up easily. When she realized I wasn't paying her fake fines, she escalated the situation in a way that crossed every legal boundary imaginable. It happened on a rainy Thursday morning. I looked out my kitchen window and saw Eleanor standing right in the middle of my driveway, snapping photos of my truck with her iPad. Standing right beside her was a heavy-duty commercial tow truck, its amber hazard lights flashing in the grey mist. My heart did a hard, cold flip in my chest. I grabbed my coffee mug, pushed open the heavy wooden screen door, and stepped out onto the porch. "What do you think you're doing?" I called out, my voice cutting sharply through the steady D. "Rizzle." Eleanor slowly turned around. She didn't look guilty. She looked triumphant. "You've been given multiple warnings," she announced, lifting her chin with absolute arrogance. "Your unregistered vehicle is violating Pinecrest Estates bylaws. The HOA has authorized its immediate impoundment at your expense." She was actually going to steal my truck right off my own property. She thought she was completely untouchable. But what Eleanor didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known, was that sitting right inside my kitchen, watching this entire illegal circus unfold through the window, was the county's chief code enforcement officer, who happened to be my cousin and weekend fishing partner. The heavy wooden screen door of my farmhouse didn't just open. It swung back with a sharp, echoing crack that cut straight through the steady morning rain. Marcus stepped out onto the porch. He wasn't wearing his official county badge or a crisp uniform. He had on his usual faded canvas field jacket, mud-caked boots, and a baseball cap pulled low over his forehead. To Eleanor, who was entirely blinded by her own suburban privilege, he looked like nothing more than an unpolished farmhand. She didn't even blink in his direction. Her eyes remained locked on me, gleaming with the self-righteous satisfaction of a petty tyrant about to execute a judgment. "Is there an issue here?" Marcus asked, his voice low, steady, and dangerously calm as he slowly descended the wooden porch steps. Eleanor let out a sharp, dismissive huff, waving her iPad dismissively in the air. "There is no issue for you to concern yourself with, worker. This vehicle is in direct violation of Pinecrest Estates' municipal covenants. We are having it towed off the premises to protect property values." Marcus didn't stop walking until he reached the edge of my gravel driveway. He cast a slow, deliberate glance at the massive commercial flatbed truck idling in the rain, its heavy steel winches hissing quietly. Then he looked down at the official neon yellow warning sticker plastered across the driver's side window of my truck. Finally, he turned his gaze back to Eleanor. "Miss," Marcus said, his tone perfectly even, "did you pull the county deed on this specific parcel of land before you authorized this tow?" Eleanor scoffed, planting her hands firmly on her hips. Her designer sweater stretched tight as she squared her shoulders. "I don't need to pull a county deed. I am the president of the Pinecrest Estates Homeowners Association. Our jurisdiction covers every square inch of visual blight within sight of our perimeter wall." The tow truck driver, a weathered guy in a heavy waterproof jacket, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He leaned out of the truck window, staring nervously between Eleanor and Marcus. "Ma'am?" the driver interjected, his voice tight with hesitation. "Are you 100% sure this is HOA common ground? My company doesn't touch private farm property without local law enforcement sign-off. It's a massive liability." Eleanor whirled around to face the driver, her face flushing a deep, angry crimson. "I am telling you for the last time, I take full legal responsibility. Tow the truck right now or I will ensure the Pinecrest HOA blacklists your company from every single development in this county." The driver swallowed hard, gripped his steering wheel, and reached for his winch controls. The hydraulic system whined to life, and the heavy steel cable began to tautly spool, locking onto my truck's front axle. I took a slow step forward, my hand resting casually in my jacket pocket. If that cable pulled another 6 inches, my suspension was going to take severe damage. Before I could even open my mouth to issue a final warning, Marcus stepped directly into the path of the tow truck. He didn't yell. He didn't rush. He simply reached into the inner pocket of his canvas field jacket, pulled out a thick leather folio, and flipped it open with a sharp snap of his wrist. The polished gold medallion of the county chief code enforcement officer caught the pale, rainy morning light, flashing like a beacon in the damp air. "Stop right there," Marcus commanded. The tow truck driver froze mid-motion, his hand hovering inches above the winch lever, the blood completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in the grey drizzle. "Chief," the driver choked out, his eyes glued to the gold shield. "Oh man, I didn't know." "You're about to find out," Marcus replied coldly. Eleanor, however, was entirely immune to reality. Her ego was so massive, so completely detached from the laws of the physical world, that she marched right up to Marcus and shoved a manicured finger right into his chest. "Put that fake prop away!" Eleanor shrieked, her voice cracking with fury. "I don't care who you think you are! You're interfering with an authorized HOA impoundment! I'm calling the sheriff right now, and I'm having both of you arrested for obstruction." Marcus looked down at her finger, then up into her wild, frantic eyes. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his face. "You want to call the sheriff, Eleanor?" Marcus asked softly. "Good, because you won't even have to dial." He reached to his belt, keyed his heavy-duty handheld county radio, and spoke 3 words that changed the entire atmosphere of the morning. "Unit 1, drop anchor at the farm driveway. We have an active grand theft in progress." From down the country road, through the heavy sheets of rain, the sharp, wailing scream of a siren suddenly cut through the air. Eleanor's triumphant smirk finally faltered, but instead of running, she did something that completely defied all human logic. The wail of the approaching siren bounced off the wet cedar trees and echoed across the open pasture. To any normal person, the sound of flashing red and blue lights tearing down a country road meant one thing: the game was over. But Eleanor wasn't normal. She was an HOA president, a woman who genuinely believed her power superseded municipal law, county ordinances, and basic physics. Instead of stepping back, she spun around and glared furiously at the terrified tow truck driver. "Don't you dare listen to them!" she screamed, her voice cracking over the hiss of the rain. "I am paying your company triple time. Hook that truck back up right now, or I will personally ensure your business is sued into non-existence." The driver looked from Eleanor to Marcus's gleaming gold badge, and then back to the tow rig. He didn't hesitate for even a microsecond. "Lady, you're out of your mind," the driver snapped. He scrambled out of the cab, practically diving onto the wet metal bed of his truck. With frantic, shaking hands, he began unhooking the heavy steel chains from my truck's front axle. "I'm not catching a federal grand larceny charge for a suburban Karen." He hurled the heavy iron chains onto the deck with a loud metallic crash, jumped back into his cab, slammed it into reverse, and peeled out of my driveway so fast his tires spat a shower of gravel against the fence. Eleanor stood alone in the rain, her mouth dropping open in absolute disbelief as her getaway vehicle abandoned her. "Coward!" she shrieked, stamping her designer boot into the mud. A split second later, a marked county sheriff's cruiser fishtailed off the paved road, kicking up a massive wall of brown water before slamming to a halt right behind the empty space where the tow truck had just been. The door flew open, and Deputy Miller stepped out into the downpour, his hand resting securely on his tie belt, his eyes scanning the chaotic scene. Eleanor's face instantly lit up. The blind panic vanished, replaced once again by that toxic, manufactured sense of supreme entitlement. She thought the cavalry had arrived to rescue her. She marched right up to Deputy Miller, waving her arms in the air like a traffic cop directing a disaster. "Officer! Thank heavens!" she cried out, putting on a masterclass of fake victimhood. "You need to arrest these 2 men immediately. They are aggressive, they are trespassing on our community's visual corridor, and they just threatened a contracted municipal service worker." Deputy Miller blinked water out of his eyes. He looked at Eleanor. Then he looked past her, spotting Marcus standing tall by the porch and me leaning casually against the railing. Miller's gaze shifted to Marcus's badge. The colour drained entirely from the deputy's face. The pouring rain seemed to matter a whole lot less, as the gravity of who he was looking at completely took over. "Chief," Miller muttered, his voice tight and formal as he snapped straight to attention. "What's going on here, sir?" Eleanor paused, her arms still raised mid-gesture. The sheer dissonance of the deputy addressing the unkempt, flannel-wearing farmhand, as Chief finally short-circuited her brain. "What are you calling him that for?" Eleanor shrieked, her voice pitching up into a frantic squeak. "Arrest them! I am the president of Pinecrest Estates. My word is law in this district." Marcus didn't blink. He took one slow step forward through the mud, his eyes locking onto Eleanor with cold, absolute authority. "Deputy Miller," Marcus said quietly, every word cutting like glass through the rain. "Take this suspect into custody for attempted grand theft auto and malicious destruction of private property." Miller didn't hesitate. He unclipped his steel handcuffs, stepped around Eleanor's frozen form, and grabbed her arm. "Ma'am, turn around and put your hands behind your back," Miller ordered. For a fraction of a second, Eleanor stared at the cold steel cuffs, as if they were an optical illusion. Then the realization of what was actually happening hit her like a freight train. She violently wrenched her arm out of Miller's grip. "Do not touch me!" she screamed, her mask of composure shattering completely. "You cannot arrest me! You don't know who I am! I own this entire valley!" And right then, in front of a county deputy, Eleanor made the absolute worst mistake of her entire life. With a blind, feral shriek of pure rage, she wound up her arm and slapped Deputy Miller squarely across the face. The wet, echoing smack sounded like a gunshot over the steady hum of the rain. The entire driveway went dead silent. Even the falling drops of water seemed to pause. You do not strike a law enforcement officer, but you never strike a deputy in front of the chief code enforcement officer who controls every zoning permit in the county. The silence that followed the slap was heavier than the grey rain pressing down on the farm. Eleanor stood frozen with her hand still raised in the air, her chest heaving as she finally realized the catastrophic mistake she had just made. She had just assaulted a sworn county deputy on private agricultural land, right in front of the county's chief enforcement officer. Deputy Miller didn't even flinch. He didn't yell, and he didn't lose his temper. He simply wiped a stray drop of rain from his cheek, his eyes narrowing into cold, unforgiving slits. Before Eleanor could open her mouth to stutter an excuse, Miller moved with lightning speed. He grabbed her arm, spun her around with practiced efficiency, and slammed her against the wet hood of his sheriff's cruiser. The harsh metallic click of the steel handcuffs ratcheting tight around her wrists sounded like a death knell for her suburban empire. "Let me go!" Eleanor shrieked, her designer sweater scraping against the dirty police cruiser as she thrashed uselessly. "This is police brutality. The Pinecrest HOA is going to sue this entire county into bankruptcy. You can't do this to me." Marcus walked up slowly, resting his hands in the pockets of his canvas jacket. He looked down at her with a calm, unbothered expression. "Eleanor, you started out with a civil zoning violation," Marcus said quietly. "Then you upgraded it to attempted grand theft. And now you've secured yourself a felony charge for assaulting a peace officer." Tears of pure, unadulterated fury began streaming down her face, cutting ugly tracks through her expensive makeup. She looked like a cornered animal, realizing that her multi-million-dollar subdivision and her plastic clipboard couldn't save her anymore. "You're making a massive mistake," she sobbed, her voice cracking as Miller hoisted her upward and opened the back door of the cruiser. "You'll never get away with harassing our neighborhood. The entire board will have your badges by sundown." She thought the Pinecrest Estates board of directors was her personal militia. She thought they would rally behind her, pool their money, and wage an endless legal war to avenge their fearless leader. What Eleanor didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have factored into her delusional math, was that the Pinecrest HOA board was about to discover a horrifying truth. Because the moment Eleanor was hauled away to the county jail in a flurry of flashing red and blue lights, I didn't feel relief. I felt anticipation. I turned around, walked back up the wooden steps of my porch, and pulled a long, heavy PVC tube out from behind the pillar. Marcus watched me, a knowing grin spreading across his face. Inside that tube was a legally certified, court-approved land survey that had been sitting in my safe for over a year. You see, 2 years ago, when the developers first broke ground on Pinecrest Estates, they wanted a grand, sweeping entrance. They wanted a massive brick-and-wrought iron security gate, a dedicated turning lane, and an automated visitor kiosk. And Eleanor, in her infinite wisdom, decided that the best place to build their multi-thousand-dollar entryway was right at the edge of the county road, ignoring the actual historical boundary markers of my family's farm. She hadn't just placed a few warning signs on my property. She had built the entire front entrance, the security gate, and half the main access road of Pinecrest Estates squarely on my family's private land. For months, I had watched them pour concrete. I had watched them lay expensive brickwork. I had watched them install high-tech security cameras, and I didn't say a single word. I let them spend their entire HOA reserve fund building a luxury fortress on my dirt. And now that Eleanor was sitting in a holding cell facing felony charges, there was no one left to hide the truth from the rest of the neighborhood. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, the crisis management group chat for Pinecrest Estates was melting down into absolute, unadulterated chaos. Word had already rippled through the ultra-luxury subdivision like wildfire. Their fearless, tyrannical HOA president had been hauled away in handcuffs by the county sheriff after committing a literal felony. But that wasn't even the worst news hitting the residents. The real nightmare began when the county surveyor and I walked right out to the front entrance of their pristine subdivision, carrying 2 heavy iron padlocks and a formal legal notice. Within minutes, 3 frantic members of the HOA board came speeding down the main street in their luxury European SUVs, slamming on their brakes and piling out into the gravel. They looked like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming freight train. "Wait, stop right there!" shouted Arthur, the vice president of the board, waving his hands frantically as he jogged toward us. He was a high-powered corporate lawyer, but right now he looked like a panicked toddler. "What is the meaning of this? You can't just padlock the neighborhood gate." Marcus stepped up beside me, flashing his official badge just so there was zero confusion about who was running the show. "Actually, Arthur, he can," Marcus said smoothly, "because that gate isn't on Pinecrest property." Arthur blinked, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool rain. "That's ridiculous! The developers built this entrance 2 years ago. It's part of our approved subdivision plan." I unrolled the certified county survey right across the hood of my truck, pointing directly to the official boundary pins hidden beneath the manicured landscaping. "Your developers cut corners to save $1, I told him, my voice completely level. They didn't pay for an independent land survey. They just guessed where the property line was and poured concrete straight onto my family's generational ranch." I tapped the legal document with my finger. Every single brick of this grand entrance, the automated visitor kiosk, the security cameras, and the first 100 feet of your main access road sit entirely on Parcel A, my land. The color completely vanished from Arthur's face. He looked at the gate, then at the survey, and then back at me. The mathematical realization hit him like a brick wall. Because the structure was permanently built onto private property without an easement, it legally belonged to the landowner. To me. You're landlocking the entire neighborhood," Arthur whispered, horror dawning in his eyes. 50 multi-million-dollar homes. No one can drive in or out without crossing your land. "Correct," I replied with a calm smile. "Which means you are officially trespassing every time you drive home from the grocery store." The rest of the board members arrived just in time to hear that little nugget of information. Instantly, the high and mighty corporate executives dissolved into a chorus of desperate begging and panic. They knew that if word got out to the rest of the neighborhood that their multi-million-dollar homes were landlocked by an angry farmer, property values would instantly plummet to zero. They didn't want to fight. They wanted to negotiate. And negotiation with a pissed-off rural property owner isn't cheap. By the following week, the Pinecrest Estates board held an emergency neighborhood meeting. Without Eleanor there to bully them, the residents voted overwhelmingly to strip her of all remaining authority and throw her completely under the bus. They also voted to accept my terms to avoid a catastrophic legal war. Instead of tearing down their multi-thousand-dollar entrance, I allowed them to keep it, under one condition. Since they wanted to charge me fake fines for parking on my own property, I decided to return the favor on a corporate scale. The HOA was forced to pay a massive, non-negotiable 7-figure permanent easement fee directly to me, giving them legal permission to use my road to access their subdivision. The payout completely obliterated their reserve funds, forcing a crushing special assessment fee on every single household in Pinecrest Estates. Eleanor's reign of terror ended in total financial and social ruin. Facing a felony assault charge and a multi-million-dollar civil lawsuit from her own neighbors for gross negligence, she was forced to sell her luxury mansion at a massive loss and leave the county in complete disgrace. As for me, I used the HOA's hard-earned cash to upgrade my farm, build a brand new barn, and pave a private driveway that bypasses their subdivision entirely. My truck is still parked right where it's always been, safely, legally, and proudly on my own land. And whenever I see a luxury SUV drive past my fence, I just smile, knowing that every single one of my wealthy neighbors is essentially paying me rent just to drive home.